Greetings from Castle Goring, from Nikki Aurora and from me. Well, I am going to plunge right in without further ado, because today we don't only have levity, we have gravitas, and we have some really rather interesting and important subjects to cover. So without further ado, I am going to plunge right in. But before doing so, I'm going to say, I think this weekend I am going to wrap up Thomas Markle's birthday celebration fund. If anybody wants, who hasn't yet shown their regard and wishes to do so, I would recommend you do so this weekend, because I am going to wrap it up, I think, on Monday. I can only say thank you very much to everybody who has given. In your thousands, you have shown Thomas Markle really what his daughter should have shown him. But of course, we forget that when Thomas Markle Jr. actually warned the world what Meghan was like and what she would do, having done it to their family, she would do it to the royal family. We all thought, oh dear, he shouldn't have said that. Turns out it was absolutely true. But anyway, we now know which side justice is served by. And thank you all very much. So without further ado, I am going to plunge in with what Gigi says. So the fact that King Charles bestowed Prince and Princess on Harry's children must then mean Meghan did, after all, carry them. You're clearly not a lawyer. Gigi, the fact that Charles bestowed, he didn't bestow. Harry and Meghan announced that their children were Prince and Princess, and thereafter the palace went along with it. The alternative could have been that Harry and Meghan could have followed the precedent set by the present Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, where even if their children were entitled to be styled Prince and Princess, that they would be shades of the Edinburgh children, who are now styled the Earl of Wessex and Lady Louise Windsor. But that wasn't good enough for Harry and Megsy baby. Oh no. But does it mean that Meghan did carry those children after all? I'll tell you what it means. In strictly legal terms, Meghan and Harry were able to produce 2 birth certificates that stated that Meghan is the lawful mother and Harry is the lawful father of those children. And since Harry and Meghan are married, there is, under the law, something called presumption of legitimacy. It usually works the other way around, where the woman gives birth to a child and it is assumed that the spouse is the father. But it cuts both ways. So let's not get carried away and say that because something has happened, it means something it might not necessarily have meant. That's not to say that I am doing anything but sticking very strictly to the letter of the law and the meaning of actions. So no, it does not necessarily follow that Meghan carried those children, although, of course, there is the presumption that she carried those children because she is on the birth certificate the lawful mother, and she is therefore under presumption of legitimacy presumed to have carried those children. But does it mean that she carried them? You know, the law is a very interesting thing. So is reality. It does not behoove you to make too many assumptions. It's always best to stick to the precise facts and let matters rest there. I hope that answers the question. Desert Flower says, it may be the government's legal responsibility to remove this or that title from Harry, or the king's legal responsibility for another. The point everyone is making is that the king and the government would never work separately at all on this issue. If the king is approached and he is disinclined, then the government will not take it any further, not unless there are some highly important reasons. I am of the personal opinion that the king does not want to remove Harry's titles, as he will eventually, one hopes, split from Meghan. And secondly, it would set a dangerous precedent for the future, where no one will feel safe in their title or position in case the king or queen changes their mind. If they divorce, perhaps the king may make overtures to strike out all her titles at that time. You know, Desert Flower, the law, and I'm now going to stick again strictly to the law of the land prevents the king from removing their peerages. He can, by an order in council, remove certain ranks, but it has to be done with the affirmation of all of the realms of which he is king. If I remember correctly, there are 14 realms of which he is king. I'm a citizen of 2 of them. People keep on saying the king should remove the titles, or now you're saying the king and the government should remove the titles, or they won't remove the titles. And I have to tell you, I think your reasoning is sound as well. I do think that the king would be very ill-advised to willy-nilly remove titles from anybody. And this was one of my objections why I refused to head up the petition when one of the former private secretaries wanted me to head up a petition so that Parliament would take steps to remove Harry's title. And I refused to do it because I knew, aside from anything else, anybody who fell foul of the populistic press would then have the risk of having their title stripped, whether it was fair or not. Sorry. So that's certainly a consideration for the king, as it ought to be. Parliament has had before it a bill which amounted to nothing. And I have to tell you, what people don't realize is that the matter is far more complex than they are giving credit. for it being, and I'll tell you why. Under the Statute of Westminster of 1931, and I'm going to quote, neither the King nor the UK government can remove Harry's title or Harry from the line of succession. That would require the unanimous consent of all the parliaments of the other 14 realms. So we're speaking about 15 separate countries, that 15 separate parliaments that would all have to be in accord. That will never happen because it would be too divisive. Some of the realms are purely black, others are mostly black. The colour question will come into play. It will cause no end of divisiveness and mischief, and no responsible leader wants it. Depriving Harry and Meghan of their titles is not worth the disruption and the tremendous hostility and the tremendous confusion and the tremendous debate that will be unleashed. There is a preamble to the Statute of Westminster. Now, may I make the point, preambles do not actually have the force of law. So at a push, they could say the Statute of Westminster doesn't apply. But for the last nearly 100 years, it has applied. It is one of the reasons why Lord Beaverbrook told Edward VIII not to go down the path he went down with trying to get permission to marry Wallis, that he should wait until he was crowned and then simply marry her, because that was his right. But he was aware of the Statute of Westminster, and he made Stanley Baldwin, who was the Prime Minister of Britain, refer to the Dominions. And they were all dead against the marriage. Well, you can depend on it. At least one segment of one of the realms is going to be against stripping Harry and Meghan of the titles, because they would feel that it was somehow due to colour. Even though they know it isn't, even though they had the proof, they would still be furthering that argument for their own political ends and to gain, say, popularity within their realm. And now I'm going to read out the second paragraph of the statute states, and whereas it is meet and proper to set out by way of preamble to this act that, inasmuch as the crown is the symbol of the free association of the members of the British Commonwealth of Nations, and as they are united by a common allegiance to the crown, it would be in accord with the established constitutional position of all the members of the Commonwealth in relation to one another, that any alteration in the law touching the succession to the throne or the royal style and titles shall hereafter require the assent as well of the parliaments of all the dominions as of the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Though, now, a preamble is not considered to have the force of statute law. Nevertheless, the Statute of Westminster has always been treated in practice as though it were a binding requirement. The convention was adopted by every country that subsequently gained its independence from Britain and became a Commonwealth realm. George V, under whose aegis this took place, expressed the desire that the laws of royal succession should be exempt from the statute's provisions. He had, in 1917, with a stroke of the pen and letters patent, altered the rank, style, title, etc. of various members of the British royal family. Nevertheless, although the king still has the right, under the preamble, which doesn't actually have force of statute law, but has been more or less accepted as if it ought to, it was determined that the principles of equality set out in the Balfour Declaration meant that all the realms should have a say in such matters. So I hope that answers the question and clears up once and for all. I know it's not going to. Because I know not everybody who's interested is looking at this time, and a lot of people aren't going to hear what I've said, and some who've heard it are going to think there's a way around it. There actually is a way around it. The king could simply ignore the Statute of Westminster of 1931, because the preamble does not have force of statute law, but he won't do it. None of the other monarchs has done it, and he won't do it. Edward VIII didn't do it, and he lost his throne as a result of it, in part. I just make that point for what it's worth. When you are a king, you have to play by the rules, although it has to be said, sometimes they're very resourceful of inventing new rules. But in this instance, they could actually ignore the fact that it's custom and not statute law. And they could actually proceed, and he would be well within his legal rights to do so. However, what that would mean would be that it would create a furor throughout the Commonwealth. Sorry. With several of the politicians taking advantage of the situation to create difficulties where there should be none. So I hope that begins to highlight the tremendous difficulties that the king and the government of this country and the government of all the other realms would face regarding Harry and Meghan. Now do you begin to see why she has all along, because remember, I'm Rachel Zane. I know the law, and I'm going to tell you how the law works, and I use the law against everybody for my benefit. Well, she's certainly been using the law for her benefit. I hope that explains it. Caroline Erisman says, this initiative may superficially offer support, but if you go to the website, you discover that it is really a data stealing trap. from political affiliation to religious affiliation to sexual preferences in order to make money. And this obviously relates to the parents' network and Harry and Meghan's appearance on the Jane Pauley show, and the completely inappropriate and exploitative way in which she behaved, and his performance was something else as well, but at least it had the benefit of some reticence and hints of honesty. Prometheus says, and I'm reading these 3 comments because they're very important. Everything they are doing is PR for data mining purposes. If you look at the consent forms, it is very, very terrifying. The same thing for the ARO email sign up for that nothing burger. It's a shell game to get your data. They will then sell it to the highest bidder. And Marla says, they are harvesting data which then sells for up to $1,000 per each person who gives that fake parents assistance group their email. This is a data mining operation, pure and simple. Well, Parents Network is actually, I think, a very commendable organization. The fact that they have found themselves being mined richly by opportunists doesn't alter the fact that it is a worthy organization. But the fact that they have got involved with such exploitative opportunists doesn't bode well for them as long as they continue the association with Harry and Meghan. If, on the other hand, they, shall we say, put distance between themselves and Archewell, now that everybody knows about their network, they can grow naturally. And if they continue an association with Archewell and Harry and Meghan, then we can really begin to be querying what their agendas really are. But in the meantime, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But yes, everything Harry and Meghan will do is always predicated upon exploitativeness. I understand if you try to go into their website, you have to provide practically even your bra size. They are great invaders of everyone's privacy, and they are great acquirers of everyone's secrets. And I know that if you submit a story to them, a plot idea, they have all rights over it, and you thereafter have none. I am afraid their modus operandi to me is anything but commendable. I would never have anything to do with people like that, ever. Linda Fisher says, and we're going to get off this subject quite quickly because we're going on to something that is rather more substantial and, dare I say, controversial. But let's tie up loose ends, because some of this is really important, if only for clarity. Linda Fisher says, this may have already been mentioned, but I wanted to mention that Jane Pauley has written and given interviews on her own experiences with depression, and the word begins with S, a certain form of ideation. So with her own experiences with depression and the form of ideation that Megsie Baby was claiming to have possessed, when we all know if she possessed it, it's an acquired taste. She is nobody's fool. She had Meghan's number. I couldn't agree more. Magdalena says, Jane Pauley is courageous and has been vocal about surviving bipolar disorder and comes across as a highly empathic individual. Pauley is a truth teller. As a psychotherapist who serves truth teller clients, I was cheering Pauley on as she exposed Meghan's lack of empathy. I can't agree more. I was taken aback, though not surprised, as Meghan displayed a significant lack of empathy and disconnect from the mother sharing her devastation. But it did give her an opportunity to show, look at what's happening with me. Yes, look at what's happening with me. Look at them. New eyes, new eye makeup. Sorry. Meghan is disconnected in many ways, as she is disconnected from self and others, whereas Jane Pauley is connected with self and others. Meghan encountered the truth teller in the interview and was thus exposed for her lack of self and overall disconnection. Exposure of not having connection to the self is the narcissist's greatest threat. And Sweet Peas says, Jane Pauley was awesome. It was fun to see Jane Pauley, F, then 2 stars and K, Fook, Frick, Think, with Mrs. Sussex. Pauley did it through word choice, a modest start. Her body language when addressing the missus and mocking the missus, touching her husband's hand as I knew you would. And may I interject at that point and say, when she could clearly see that she wasn't touching his hand. So what had been agreed wasn't taking place, but she was proceeding as if it were taking place, calling time on the game. Brilliant. Totally professionally done. Nobody can criticize her at CBS for doing what she did, but point well delivered. Like Alison P. Davis in The Cut. Hang 'em with their own words and deeds. If I may continue. Personally, I enjoyed watching Miss Pauley twist the knife in the missus's back while appearing affable and professional throughout. So did I. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was so subtle and sophisticated and civilized. Mrs. Sussex got markled by Miss Pauley. Well done. She sure did. And Gina Wiggles says, is Jane Pauley blind? Mimi put her claw on Has-Been's leg. Speculation is that she was following the teleprompter and read it the way it was supposed to happen. Apparently Has didn't cooperate with the script, and Jane Pauley did not make the adjustment that a professional of her stature would have made if she chose to do so. I thought it was wonderfully subtle. I thought Megsie Baby was beaten at her own game by a past mistress, and I thought by somebody who has empathy and knows that what Megsie Baby was talking about was well, she buys bags of it from the garden centre and then spreads it in her flower beds. Megsy Baby, of course, creates lots of it in the 16 bathrooms that she has. White Mirrors says, can you talk, and now we come to the really important thing. Can you talk about two-tier policing and freedom of speech online? And AP Wilton says, I am a Canadian resident in the US and can't wait to hear what your thoughts are on the unrest in the UK. Well, I think that it has certainly been an interesting time, to put it mildly. I have been keeping my eye on the situation, and I don't believe in being precipitate on important matters. I do think the underlying issues are very complex and very important. I have reservations about the way Keir Starmer is trying to exploit the situation to make political capital and drive the citizenry in directions that would cause loss of civil liberties. I have grave concerns about the former director of public prosecutions in this country, which is what Keir Starmer is, using his knowledge of the law to try to charge people with offences of terror because they made a comment. Whether ill-advised or not is beside the point. On social media. That's not what terrorist laws were created for, and it is an abuse of them. And it also trivializes genuine acts of terror. And it is the thin end of the wedge, and I think it should be deplored. That doesn't mean that I approve of people behaving in a savage and destructive and unlawful manner. Some of the protesters were very evocative of the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots in America a year or two or 3 years ago, where opportunists were marauding and joining the party, so to speak. And there is actually a phenomenon that is known to sociologists where people in groups, shall we say, they are like herd instincts. They're like pack animals. And it is a release of, and in a funny sort of way, it's also a bonding exercise. And we are all animals. We shouldn't forget that. We may be the highest form of animal, but we are animals. And we need to guard against the most base animal instincts that we have. And behaving like Antifa protesters and marauding through the streets and setting fire to things, it's totally unacceptable. Having said that, when Extinction Rebellion ground the country to a halt, tied themselves to roads, blocked traffic for hours, stopped ambulances delivering dying people to hospitals, stopped people going to their parents' and children's funerals, weddings, and indeed to the hospital themselves, stopped mothers taking their children to school. The police stood by and were collusive. They assisted them. So there is definitely two-tier policing in this country. And there is definitely two-tier freedom of speech online. Because if people of one perceived political persuasion, and I'm against totalitarianism, irrespective of whether it claims to be left, right, or centre, well, it can't be centre, but left or right, I'm dead against it. And I do not think that it is constructive of the Prime Minister to dismiss everybody who was protesting as extreme right-wingers. A lot of them weren't. You know, I intermingle an awful lot with the working class in this country. And I speak to them, and they're very happy to speak to me. White van man that Emily Thornberry and other Labour bigwigs dismissed. White van man is usually very sound, very sensible. White van man is the backbone of this country. And white van man has been completely dismissed and has been sold down the river by successive governments. 2.5 Tory governments, because the first one wasn't a Tory government, it was a coalition. Did they do one thing of any significance that would have actually alleviated the valid concerns of not only white van man, but white van man who's black as well as white van man who's white? Or woman. They didn't. Now, I'm an immigrant in this country. I was born into an immigrant background because my father's family were emigres, and my father's family have been emigres from several different countries. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh because it's not really funny, but you do have to laugh. It's so ridiculous. So I have nothing against immigrants or emigres. I certainly have nothing against economic migrants, but I do have something against illegal migrants. And there has been tremendous concern in this country for some considerable length of time at the tremendous influx of illegal immigrants who are then put to the front of the queue, while Britons are left at the back of the queue. I'm sorry, that's wrong. And whether it has been the Tory party, which is Labour light, it has to be said. It's not a Tory party. It's not, the last 2 Tory governments were not Tory governments. They were Labour light governments. In some respects, Keir Starmer is less Labour light than the successive prime ministers we've had, with the exception of Liz Truss. And she didn't get a chance. They made sure she didn't get a chance. And Boris would have, if Marina had stayed with him, his first wife, and he hadn't fallen under the spell of Carrie Antoinette, he might well have proven to be a bigger success than he turned out to be. But her influence was so disastrous that he was toppled. So we have had no Tory government for some time, which means that and I'm going to stick to white van man as an expression for the working class people of this country, irrespective of their colour. Their interests have not been preserved. Their interests have been ignored. Is it any wonder that they then become frustrated? So then you have the mainstream media making out that Nigel Farage is some right-wing loony. Nigel Farage was a very successful businessman. Nigel Farage made his money. Nigel Farage had no political ambitions. He had the desire for the good of the country. And he has been the voice of a lot of these people, and it's disparaged. And ignoring the valid reasons behind the protests is rarely counterproductive. There are problems with illegal immigrants in this country. Now, it has to be said, as an immigrant myself, I'm going to make a few points in favor of immigration before I also point out the concerns, valid concerns, that the British people, born and bred original British people, have where immigration is concerned. There's no doubt that immigration has been a wonderful thing in many ways. When I first started living in England in the mid-70s, you couldn't get a good meal for love or money in practically anywhere except the Connaught. It was impossible. Now we have some of the finest food in the country, in London, and we have throughout the country generally some of the finest food in the world. Our food now is infinitely superior to the French, and I know what I'm talking about. I lived on and off for 14 years in France. I had a chateau in the south and a flat in Paris. I'm very familiar with French culture, French customs, and French cuisine. Ours is superior. That is entirely due to the influx of foreigners that we have had in this country. That's one thing. Another thing has been the multi-culturalism, which in part was a product of empire and has continued with the influx of foreigners. That's also a good thing. We are multinational, which is also a good thing, as long as the core segments of the population are not denigrated and disrespected and disregarded, which they are. They are by both main political parties. They are by the mainstream media. They are by the advertisers. They are by the quangos that have been set up to further the inclusive agenda. And I'm all in favor of inclusiveness, by the way. What I'm not in favor of is the exclusionary aspects of inclusiveness that the inclusive orthodoxy wish to impose upon us, where you will have ghettos that they call cultural centers and pockets of this and pockets of that. No. If you have moved to a country, you're supposed to, well, the expression in Rome, do as the Romans do. Instead of which we have people demanding Sharia law here, this, that, and the other. And there are whole no-go areas in various cities where Now, to an extent, it's natural that people want to live with their own kind. So, to an extent, that is a natural phenomenon. But when you then have immigrants trying to impose their way of doing things upon the host nation, I'm sorry, aside from disrespect, it's just plain, plumb bad manners and bad policy. One of the facts which neither the Labour Party nor the Conservative Party has chosen to deal with is the fact that we have a very vociferous minorities in this country demanding advantages over the original citizenry, I should say, of this country. Using phrases like white privilege, or that there needs to be positive discrimination. There should be no discrimination. You know, why should somebody be discriminated against? Because positive discrimination is also discrimination. And I'm afraid if you're not the perfect person for the job, you shouldn't be getting the job. I'm not interested in the fact that you're black, brown, yellow, pink, or green. If you are a brain surgeon, I want you to be the best. I'm sorry, I don't care that your grandfather was this and your uncle was that and your brother is something else. I'm sorry. It all comes down to results and ability. And anything else is insane. It's counterproductive and it's destructive. As Martin Luther King and Morgan Freeman have both pointed out, it should be about character and not color. Where does either political party in this country get off with the belief that the white working class Britain, the white male working class Britain, say from 18 to 25, is a member of a privileged group and should therefore be at the back of the queue? They've never been privileged. They've never been privileged. Why should they be at the back of the queue in their own country for people who are not of this country taking precedence over them? Also, a friend of mine, a couple I should say, he's black, he's a black Jamaican, she's English, she's a doctor, and they are a wonderful couple and they have the most beautiful daughter. And she has made the point that she and her sister-in-law, his sister, have commented on how she didn't use the word offensive, she used the word startling. It was to them that practically every advertisement on television has the average representative British couple being mixed race when they're not. The black population in this country, I think, amounts to less than 4%. And then I think the subcontinental population amounts to another 12 or so percent. Something like 80% of the citizens of this country are Caucasian. Why does either political party think their interests should be distorted to the detriment of anybody else in this country? I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why, in my opinion. The Labour Party has sussed out that immigrants will vote Labour while the prosperous British working class, the working people of Britain, will not necessarily vote Labour. We have a massive Labour majority in this country, which was achieved with the lowest result of a voting population ever. That's how disenchanted and disaffected the British public quite rightly are by our failing democracy. Now, I'm all in favour of democracy. I'm all in favour of a system that works. And I'm afraid that just as how the Conservatives, and I have been vociferous in stating my disapproval of their conduct, and I have up to now said that some of the things that the Labour government seem to be doing were good. Well, I'm afraid trying to hijack the riots and use them as an opportunity to not only exaggerate and gain force of obscure laws for common everyday practices. Sorry, it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. Having said all of that, I was delighted to see that there were counter demonstrations in favour of inclusiveness. But that is not to say that all of the original demonstrators should have been dismissed as right-wing monsters, because many of them weren't. Many of them were people who were demonstrating for valid, heartfelt reasons. Yes, there were extremists amongst their lot. There are always extremists amongst every lot. And certainly we should not be having marauding monsters on the street rioting the way we did, irrespective of who is doing the rioting. So, I suppose that makes my position clear. I hope I have answered the question. I'm sure I haven't covered it fully or comprehensively. It's a very complex and involved issue. And, you know, any society that has welcomed, as the British people have, the number of immigrants that the British people have in the last half a century, there will always be slight issues of adjustment. But that is not to say that the ordinary, average Anglo-Saxon Brit doesn't have a right to feel that he and his interests are represented in the country of his ancestors. I'm sorry, he has a right. And we should respect that right. And every government should respect that right. And it is not racist to respect the rights of the original population and to shove them to one side, dismiss them on the grounds that they are privileged when they're not, and to then have people who you know are going to vote for you or hope are going to vote for you. Taking from that element of the population that which he is entitled to. It's wrong. It's wrong. And it's not fostering harmony. And if this government thinks it's going to go about things in the way it appears to be going about things, in this instance, it's going down the wrong path. It is going to invite nothing but further disharmony when what we need is harmony. And also, may I point out that many of these protests might not have taken place at all had the perpetrator of the original crime been identified for what he was, instead of the authorities pussyfooting around about his identity. I mean, what's that all about? I'll tell you what I think that's all about. That's about, in inclusive Britain, we can't say that it's a British-born person of African origin who's killed innocent children. No, we have to just ignore that fact and deny it and act as if it didn't happen. Of course it infuriates people. And it's playing the race card. It's playing the race card by omission, but it's still playing the race card. We need a society where the race card is not played. We have some wonderful people of all colours in this country who have pulled together for racial harmony. Trevor Phillips is one. Dare I say it? I'm another. People say it, and I'm gonna use myself as an example. And I think we should all be pulling together for racial harmony and not having politicians using what they regard as points of interest for them politically to hang on to the levers of power and be manipulating the society in ways that it is destructive for the society to go. It's not a constructive way of governing. It is divisive and it creates problems by failing to acknowledge the valid problems of a huge bulk of the citizenry of this country. A huge bulk. They have been ignored by the Tory party. They're now being ignored by the Labour Party. I mean, wouldn't you be frustrated? I certainly would. And in conclusion, I would like to make 1 or 2 points. In the 1980s, we had the Brixton riots. My brother's law firm is one of the law firms that represented some of the people who were charged in the riots. The barrister who represented one of the clients was an old friend of Mickey's and mine called the Honourable Bruce Pitt. His father, Lord Pitt of Hampstead, was a famous black doctor, political activist, and the second black member of the House of Lords. The first was the cricketer Sir Larry Constantine. And Mickey and Bruce said to me, they wanted me to show up in court every day in my mink coat because they wanted the jury to note that and in those days, the average juror would have had no idea who I was, because I certainly wasn't as well known as I am now. I might have been well known in gossip column circles and in Tatler and Harper's and Queen's circles, but I can tell you I was not well known the way I am now, where if I walk down the street, people stop me and ask for selfies. That wasn't the case in those days. But they wanted the jury to see that a white woman with a mink coat was on the legal team. That's how much we have come in terms of progress since then. And in those days, blacks in this country had a really far rougher ride than you would imagine, and certainly than they have now. Of course, there's always prejudice. People are prejudiced in favor of beauty, they're prejudiced against beauty, they're in favor of grand people, they hate grand people, they're in favor of white people, they hate white people, they're in favor of black people, they hate black people, blah, 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 blah. It's so, but as a society, we have become one of the most wonderfully inclusive in the world. And if you are capable and able, your color does not militate against you in many ways. However, that wasn't always the case. But why should we substitute one disadvantaged and or oppressed group with another, and then claim that the disadvantaged group is privileged and has always been, when it's never been? I just make that point for what it's worth. And I don't think anybody in their right mind could think that me, with my background and my history, would be looking in any way, shape, or form for anything but racial harmony and societal harmony. And it's not going to come with the government making out that people who get caught up in the heat of the moment on social media and make ill-advised comments should be tried as terrorists and sent to prison. It's insanity. But it's also dictatorial. It's the thin end of the 1984 George Orwellian wedge. And on that note, I will say, I hope my position is made clear. I'm in favor of peace, respect for all, harmony, and I think we need to be very careful in terms of putting the interests of immigrants and interlopers, before the interests of those who have a historic birthright in whatever territory it is. And at the moment, we're speaking about the United Kingdom. So I hope that gives some indication of how I feel. The subject is extremely complex, but as with everything that is complex, it can be reduced to its simplest elements. And I'm afraid Keir Starmer's government needs to be very careful. And as for that Sadiq Khan trying to play the colour card and the religion card, and he doesn't feel safe and his children don't feel safe. Nobody cares about your feelings, my dear man. And stop trying to capitalise. It's disgusting. It's counterproductive. It's irresponsible. And ultimately, you're playing a race card that you shouldn't be playing. It doesn't assist in harmony, and certainly not in the city of which you are mayor. Don't you think you've done enough harm in London without doing any more? And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in so I will know what matters you would like us to be addressing together. Godspeed. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and take good care. Bye-bye.